happy Family Day to you all, and to you too, John.
Thank you. And if you're in the United States and listening, it's President's Day, so have a happy President's Day.
Thank you. It's McCowan. It's Shannon with you. Some hockey talk today as it's sort of the second half of the season, although it really pertains more to the All-Star break than anything else. But we'll talk about it, where we're going. We got about a month till the trade deadline. Who's likely to do stuff, and will it matter at all? Mike Zeisberger, Scott Burnside will join us after these messages. McCowan and Shannon back with you. I bid you greetings and salutations. I'm always uncomfortable with this notion of the second half of a season when, in fact, the break, which is supposedly defines the second half, is well beyond the second half. And they do that in the NHL and the NBA as well, and in Major League Baseball. So it's really not the second half, but it is the dull era, usually.
Or what do you want to call it? The stretch run?
Well, I don't know what it is.
Dog days?
Dog days is probably the best definition. And I mean, there are decisions that are going to be made based upon the standings, but for the most part, guys, things are, especially in the East, almost determined already. Mike Zeisberger of NHL.com, Scott Burnside of Daily Faceoff join us. What do we learn in the second half, Z, that we don't learn in the first half?
Well, I mean, it's interesting you put it that way, Bob, because I was talking to an Eastern Conference executive this week, and what he said, looking at, and this will trickle into the trade deadline, he goes, he sees 4 teams above every other team: Colorado, Carolina, Florida, and Tampa. And then he said in the next stage, there's a bunch of wannabes that they could be contenders. They could get past that big 4 if they get goaltending or anything. But he seems to think that there's an upper echelon of those 4 teams. So what fascinates me, not so much how the standings are going to play out, but which of those other teams, and he puts Toronto in there, Boston, Vegas, Calgary, we get St. Louis, we can go down the list. Which of those teams is going to mortgage the future for who knows what a guy like Giroux is going to land them? But is that player going to be enough to get him into that top tier? And so, according to him, a lot of GMs feel the same way. So it's going to be fascinating to see what happens. So I'm more fascinated to see about some of the moves that are going to be made, as opposed to, as you said, especially in the Eastern Conference, the playoff positions seem pretty much set.
Well, the one move of significance that's been made that is now we're starting to be able to assess it is the Eichel move, who got a goal the other night. But Scotty, do you think Eichel's arrival in Vegas does something really significant for the Golden Knights?
I wanted you to give the big reveal, Bob. You got the VGK thing on. I wanted you to turn around and have Eichel right across the back.
It doesn't exist.
I wanted that reveal, but no, I think, Jack Eichel's, as long as he stays healthy and it looks, early returns are great. And I think, I think he's a great player. The game's better when a guy like Jack Eichel's on the ice, and good for him for finding a place. And I hope it works out. But here's the, I love that Vegas team. I love how they're constructed, except now their goalie's hurt again. They look like a team that's treading water a little bit. Now they're coming off a win. As we're taping this, they got a win night before we tape this. But do they have the goaltending to stand up to a Colorado? Do they have a goaltending that allows them to beat Calgary or Minnesota or St. Louis?
Yeah.
I don't know. And, I love, listen, I love the story. And it came from my good friend and my boss, Frank Saravalli, some interest by Vegas in Marc-Andre Fleury. I mean, what a great story that would be. And Kelly McCrimmon poo-pooed it right away. I got to tell you, if you're not out looking for a goaltender, if you're the Vegas Golden Knights, then you're not doing your job.
Right.
And I don't care whether it's Marc-Andre Fleury or not. But if you're not looking for help in goal, I see zero chance Vegas can win a cup or go to a conference final, as they are, unless they're guaranteed Robin Lehner's going to be healthy all the way through, and that appears to be, I don't know how you could guarantee that. I don't see how that team can achieve what it should based on its lineup. And I love Jack Eichel there, but right now you have a fatal flaw in goal. And and to me, that opens up the West, which is already wide open.
Yeah.
Outside of Colorado, who are the other teams? And I would have put Vegas. I like Vegas to beat Colorado with a healthy Robin Lehner. Right now, I don't know what that team's capable of.
But there's just a minute. There is another flaw in Vegas. And the flaw is the cap. We right at this point, we may never see Stone, Pacioretty, and Eichel play together the way it's designed.
You'll see it in game 1 of the first round. That's
remember
when
Kucherov last year.
Yeah, no, but I mean, you're gonna wait Mark Stone out and let him sit there on long term until the end of the regular season.
Well,
listen, to Scott's point, and I mean, I understand that Vegas needs goaltending, but John, I mean, and you're close to this team. I mean, is there any other team in the National Hockey League, and we have talked about it on this podcast ad nauseum, that could have used a goaltender of Marc-Andre Fleury's status than the Edmonton Oilers? I understand that the Edmonton Oilers have flaws and warts on that team, but when you look at the top end talent, and yes, the defense is porous, but I mean, I don't think there's been a more obvious Achilles heel for any other team in the National Hockey League than the Edmonton Oilers in the goal crease.
Yeah. No, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. I mean, and you have to know that, I mean, Mike Smith in his last start let 4 goals in on 7 shots, got pulled against Minnesota. The Kenny Holland's trying to find a way to make a phone call. There were a couple of guys, as you guys know, I've been working at the Olympics. There's a couple of goalies that may be available. And he might have been one of the only general managers scouting what was going on in Beijing to see if there was a goalie available. The kid from Slovakia, Rebar, was pretty good. I wonder if Kenny's made a phone call on him already.
Like, listen, I love the goaltending discussion, but I talked to a GM last week and we were talking about the goaltending. You think it's almost, and there's always the potential failure when you add a top player. Besides mentioned Claude Giroux. I hope Claude Giroux goes to a contender. I'd love to see him take a run at a cup. Guy deserves it. How often do we see those top end guys who go to a team and they don't fit, or it takes them a year to fit?
But goaltending is the only place where somebody can go in and actually make a difference quickly. Although, if you look at history, Scott, remember Ryan Miller getting traded from Buffalo to St. Louis?
Exactly. Well, but I guess that's my point. It's even harder, I think, for goaltenders. If you're looking at getting a starting goaltender, it's even harder to integrate that kind of goaltender. I think Ben Bishop took him a full year in Dallas before he became, he became a Vezina Trophy finalist, I believe, but certainly Vezina worthy. But it took him a year, and it takes time. The one guy that hasn't taken Freddie Anderson all that long to integrate into Carolina.
It's not April yet.
Well, yeah, but you got to get there first. And I guess my point is, and I'm with Zeiss. This, you watch Edmonton play, and you're like, how's that? What's going to happen there? You can't just. Would Marc-Andre Fleury go to Edmonton? I don't know, right? I don't know if he's going there or not. But even if you get, I heard there's all kinds of stories. Darcy Kumper goes to Edmonton, Marc-Andre Fleury goes to Colorado. Okay, you hear those things. Darcy Kumper's been pretty darn good.
Really
I don't see them making a move there.
No,
but you can't. And why would you? Like, it's fraught with danger to try and install a number 1 goaltender that you picked up from somewhere else on March 21st, or if you even get ahead of it. As we saw with Tyler Toffoli going to Calgary again, Brad Treliving, good job by you. Get ahead of the curve. You better do it right now. Or I think, and still then to me, it's 50-50 whether it works.
Well, I'm not denying that you may be right. I just don't understand why integrating a goaltender in a National Hockey League team is so difficult. There's the relationship between the goaltender and the forwards and defensemen is pretty standard. I mean, sure, there are idiosyncrasies that each goaltender has, but as a general rule, playing goal is playing goal. Playing defense, clearing the front of the net is clearing the front of the net.
Old school hockey.
It is the only position. I think we all agree with this. It's the only position where you can make potentially an immediate impact. You put Eichel on Vegas, and granted, they're missing Stone and can't play him because of the cap situation. Is Eichel going to elevate Vegas, his mere presence, from a contender to a favorite? No, I don't think anybody believes that to be the case. And it's the same with every trade deadline. Now, 99.9% of the trades that are made at the deadline are nonsensical fourth liners, and fans go berserk over the potential impact of that, which at the end of the day is almost invariably nothing. It means absolutely nothing to the fortunes of the teams involved. But even a star player like Eichel, and granted, the deal was made a long time ago, but it's effectively now a trade deadline deal because he's just playing. He's just starting to play. Other than getting Fleury, I can't think of one other deal that if a team makes it, it changes their fortune. Can you?
Well, that's the thing, Bob. And I know your good buddy Brian Burke always used to say this, but he said there's no day in the National Hockey League, 365 days a year, where the price or the stock of a player is so overrated as on trade deadline. And I mean, Bob, you worked those marathon things in a former life, in a former career, where you
Not
sit
many
around
times.
all day and breaking a number 6 defenseman has just been traded for a 5th round draft pick.
It's all nonsense.
But Scott brought up a point, and I think this is interesting to debate too. We all agree that Claude Giroux is an excellent player. But is he at this point of his career an elite difference maker that he was 5 years ago, 7 years ago?
Like, I don't think you see, I disagree with Bob, right? I mean, I don't think the folks in Tampa think it was nonsensical when they brought in Zach Bogosian, who'd been cast off by Buffalo, or Kevin Shattenkirk, who'd been bought out by the Rangers, or even, both Barclay Goodrow and Blake Coleman were not household names necessarily, but both were critical pieces to Julian. Well, all 4 of those guys were critical pieces, and you can throw in Luke Shen too, to back-to-back Stanley Cup wins. And I talked to another GM, and we were talking about the trade deadline. He's like, most GMs are it's about filling in those gaps.
Yeah.
If you're Boston right now, and Boston's not very good right now, right? And they got issues. What happens now that Tuukka Raska's gone, and they're the one team, frankly, in that East that is they're not really vulnerable, but they're a little bit vulnerable to falling out. Detroit's not going to catch them, but maybe Columbus. I don't know.
Well,
regardless,
the key thing there is Bergeron, though, right? How healthy is Patrice Bergeron?
Well, sure, and I guess that's my point is that if you are bringing in a Claude Giroux with the expectation that he changed, if you're boss, we need Claude Giroux because then he allows us to beat Florida or Carolina or Tampa in the first round. I don't see that happening. And if that's what you're hoping for, then you are whistling in the dark as a GM and as an organization. To me, it's like you have to, I think, if it's a complementary player, if it's about filling in a gap, Tyler Toffoli, I like that. But Tyler Toffoli doesn't have to score 25 goals down the stretch. He just needs to fit in.
Yeah.
Well,
that brings up a really good point about Giroux, Mike, and you can answer it first. So what does Giroux bring to a team? Who would he displace in Colorado, particularly? Because that's where we hear a lot of noise about Giroux and the Avalanche. What does Giroux do, and what percentile of improvement does he make to a team that's pretty damn good already? Isn't that the question Joe Sakic has to ask?
Yeah, definitely. And Just quickly on the Bruins, I mean, let's remember it's only a year ago, I believe, that they brought in Taylor Hall, and he was supposed to be the same type of thing. And what did that do? They won one round. So I think there's an example there. What does Giroux do? Well, obviously, I mean, he improves an already outstanding top six. I think what you'll have to do, because you've already got McKinnon and Kadri there, is flip around. He'll have to, switch between center and the wing, which he's done before in the past. But you're right, John. I mean, what do they give up for him? And here's the other thing. Colorado has to look long term. I know we've talked before about what Nazem Kadri's future is going to be in Colorado.
Kadri and McKinnon.
They got to save their money for Nathan McKinnon. I mean, that to me is a slam dunk. So do you want to start flipping draft picks? Because those prospects, you're going to have to start inserting them into your lineup once you're paying Nathan McKinnon $10 million plus, which I think is a slam dunk that he's going to get.
I mean, I'm not to harp on the Giroux thing, but can Claude Giroux be a role player? Seriously?
Yeah. Well, I think I go back to now. Antoine Vermette at the stage of his career
he was a role player, though.
Well, wait a minute, though. Antoine Vermette was a skilled player. He wasn't, didn't have the profile and the contract that Claude Giroux has. But Antoine Vermette went to Chicago. I don't think Joel Quenneville was, he was a healthy scratch. He didn't play much. But you know what? He was critical in the West Final against Anaheim, and was critical in the final against Tampa. And
he was their best faceoff guy that whole playoff run. Really was.
But he was not a guy who, listen, okay, so you're paying $8 million prorated for a role player, but Claude Giroux gets that, right? I mean, the only reason he's going if he understands that, and if you have to have that understanding, I think, within your organization. Because, and you alluded to this, like, there's always a ripple effect. It's like, okay, we got, like in Vegas, at least that's a team that was crying out for centers, right? I mean, Chandler Stevenson, Nicholas Roy, so he fits there. But when you bring in Claude Giroux, you got to make room for him. And there's going to be people who are going to be ticked off, right? Because their ice time is going to diminish and barring injury. So that is something Joe Sakic, Don Waddell, Chris Drury in New York with the Rangers, all these GMs of teams that have a shot are like, okay, we could get that guy, but what happens when we do? And I think sometimes that maybe you don't think that far down the road, but you probably should be in having a real frank discussion with your coach about, you get this guy, what happens?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that really when Mike talked about McKinnon and Kadri, Giroux's acquisition would have more of an impact on Tyson Jost than anybody else in Colorado. That and you're going, holy smokes, Tyson Jost, and you guys know Tyson. He's a glue guy. He's a role player, understands his role, works well in the room. Teammates like him, and all of a sudden there's going to be that. Well, he's bumped down. How does that affect him? How does that affect his teammates? I think that's one. I'm not worried about the money. I'm not, because managers, that's what they're paid to do, is manage the cap. I'm more worried about the chemistry, because in the end, it's chemistry that will win you the Stanley Cup. It's not going to be what the cap hit is in May, June, and July.
Well, the team that flies under the radar that I think Claude Giroux would be the perfect fit for is the Minnesota Wild. I really think that they've kind of flown under the radar. They've had a hell of a year. Now, the problem is, I mean, they're in the same division as Colorado. So, I know for a fact, speaking to some Western Conference executives, is that the one thing they don't want to do, whether you're the wild card team coming from the Pacific or finishing fourth in the Central, is you want to avoid the Colorado Avalanche at any cost. But when I look at that Minnesota team, and they finally have some sizzle up front and that, but I think he would fit in great there, and I think he wouldn't just be a role player. I think he could be a top six player on that team. Now, whether they do it or not remains to be seen. But if you're asking me which teams do you think he'd be a good fit for, I think he would slot in very well in Minnesota.
I love the Minnesota fit, and I'm curious to see. I love that team. As we're recording this. Oh, did they put a beating on the Oilers?
Oof.
And there's, and I hate to even use this term because I know it's been out there, but I love their depth, right? And it's every night it's a different, it's Kevin Fiala, Bukestad comes back in the lineup. But I'm with you, Zeiss, and John, maybe you mentioned this too, but Claude Giroux fits in a little bit differently there. But I do think that's a team that is used to, like, it's been different guys at different points. Ryan Hartman, what a great season he's having. So you install a guy like Claude Giroux. I think maybe that's an easier fit than trying to wedge him into Colorado. And Minnesota, they're going to start to pay the piper for buying out Zach Parise and Ryan Suter starting next year and next 2 or 3 years after that. If you're Bill Guerin, you've got some cap space. You can't send a ton of assets out because you're going to need them moving forward. But man, I love that team, and I like the way they play, and I think they match up pretty damn well against Colorado, frankly.
The fascination for me is it's the one team where you have to put in a little bit of an asterisk beside Bill Guerin to say, how much will his owner push to do something? Because, the owner in Minnesota is one. Craig's a guy that he wants to get to the top quickly. He always has, whether it was when he owned Nashville and now I went in owning Minnesota, which is why they ended up with those 2 awful contracts of Parise and Suter in the first.
Yeah.
So, so how does Bill, who's done a marvelous job there, how does he manage ownership? And then and how many owners are out there between now and the 21st pushing their guy, do something and get us over the top? And that relationship and that managing up to your owner to try to figure out what we do. No, we're in this for the long term. You talked about Chris Drury. If Jim Dolan says we got to do something quick, we got to do something, we got to go, it's too much money at stake. What does Chris Drury forsake for the future? Some teams, the president and general manager can manage up and the owner sits back. There's a few teams still where the owner will stick his toe in the water and say, hey, listen, I want to win now, and we have to make a change. And the manager's really at his beck and call.
Winning is sorry, Scotty. Winning is about, when we talk about winning, we don't talk about winning games. We talk about winning a Stanley Cup. And very early in this conversation, the assessment was made that there are at least 4 teams that you could put in a hat and say any one of them could be the favorite to win the Stanley Cup as of right now. Probably Tampa would get the nod of most people because of their experience, because they've won 2. But there are 4 at least, and you probably could make the argument there are 8 or 10 that have a shot. And it raises the question to me, in a year like this where there is clear parity at the top, do you risk more if you go for it with the understanding that it's not just one team you're trying to get better than, it's 4 or 6 or 8 or 10? Thoughts on that?
Well, I think one of the examples we saw last year, and I'll talk about the Canadian teams now, and focusing in on the Toronto Maple Leafs. People talk about, Nick Foligno last year and what the Leafs gave up for him. Look, at the time, the Toronto Maple Leafs were only going to have to play, if they got to the Stanley Cup final, they would only have had to play 6 Canadian teams and 2 American teams to get to the final. So 8 teams out of 32 teams to get to the final or be in the final. The 6 in Canada, obviously, and then semifinals and finals. I think that was the window that was open because that was the easiest road, not only for the Leafs, but for all the Canadian teams. And now it's a different situation. I mean, Foligno was hurt. If he would have been healthy and played the way he had played the previous season in Columbus, I think it was a good move. Now, I think it's more clouded. I don't think there is that easier route like some of the, no offense, but the Montreal Canadiens had. And you know what? I give them credit. Somehow they beat Vegas in the conference final. But to that point, I think it's more difficult this year for everybody than
Sure.
it was a year ago. And so you better be careful. I mean, giving away your assets and that, if you think, you want to so-called go for it.
Well, hey, listen. Okay, so everything we've talked about, you guys have touched on it. It's filling those holes on a team.
Mm-hmm.
For a team to go to the Stanley Cup final, win the Stanley Cup, 2 goalies, 10 defensemen,
Yeah.
15 or 16 forwards.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be, and you have to try to stay healthy.
Yeah.
Staying healthy is going to be the biggest issue for every team in the league, particularly with the second half of the season, back-to-backs and 40 games in 80 days.
And I will say this, John, when you talk about, the need for depth, for me, the biggest area of your team that it seems in past years that you suffer the most injuries, that you need the most depth on, is on the blue line.
Sure.
Clearly. And that's why I think at the deadline, it's going to be those blue liners. I mean, I don't, whether it's a Sherratt or somebody like that from Montreal, and I just use him as an example. I mean, I think that the prices are going to be, you're going to have to overpay for a guy like that, because that's how valuable those depth defensemen are, whether they're overvalued or not.
But Scotty, every manager you talk to, the second words he says, well, I need 8 or 9. I need maybe 10, right?
Yeah, no. Well, if you look at Tampa, I mean, we talked about those. If you said, oh my gosh, you've got Luke Schenn and Kevin Shattenkirk and Zach Bogosian, you said, oh boy, you're loading up for a couple of cup runs. Well,
David Savard last year.
Hey, David Savard he's in a different category, and they paid a premium, just as they paid a premium for Coleman and for Barclay Goodrow. Every year I think we would have the same kind of conversation. Maybe it's more pronounced because of the flat cap and the compressed schedule, and certainly the top, the East is filled with 6 or 7 really good teams. Pittsburgh's a really good team. Washington has shown at times through the first half to be a really good team. And then the rest that we've already mentioned. In the West, like if you're using an argument, if you're a GM and you're afraid to load up or to make a move because Colorado's too good, I don't know. Like I understand that thinking, but Colorado's not. They're a team that got pushed around by Vegas in the second round last year, and they still have to prove, not unlike Florida and Carolina and the Leafs, of course, that you can play the way you need to play in the playoffs to have success. So, I'm not going to cede Colorado a Stanley Cup or a trip to the final yet. There are teams in the West that can beat them, and they are vulnerable, I think, on some level. So if you're Minnesota, why not? Again, we're not talking about let's trade 5 first-round picks. It's like, can you make one move or 2 moves to address certain issues that you think allow you to not just beat Colorado, but to beat anyone in your bracket to get to a cup final? I love, to me, this is the great part of the season, because there's a lot of pressure internally and externally on a lot of teams to make those kinds of moves. And if you make smart moves, they can help you win a cup. You can do that.
Yeah.
And if you don't make the move and you don't win a cup, you always wonder, damn.
I fundamentally disagree with that assessment. I mean,
but the truth is there.
I can't.
It is there.
Well, no, it's not.
Undeniable.
No, it's not. You can turn. You can spin it into that. This team went and got this guy, and they won a cup. Well, did they win a cup because of that guy? Did they win a cup because of that change? No one can make that assessment. And the truth of the matter is, you don't turn chicken shit into chicken salad with one deal. It can't be done.
Well,
it's a team game, and
you guys are arguing
the most any player is going to play is 20 minutes, 1/3 of that game. You can make a change with an NBA team. If you need a starting pitcher and to go into the playoffs or World Series, that can be very impactful when you only need 3 starting pitchers essentially in the postseason. Hockey is not one of those games. And you hockey pucks keep trying to assess that it is, that all these things are important. Well, they have some level of significance, but I would submit that if you are not in the picture right now, if you do not consider yourself at least a 25% chance of winning the cup today, getting Giroux is a waste of time, money, and energy.
Sure.
Or any player of that competence. Having said that, getting a goaltender at this time of year can be critical. And for some reason, it's no different than why aren't goaltenders drafted higher? Everybody knows you got to have a good one, and everybody is reluctant to go and get one. And it puzzles me no end. And I think we agree. Fleury is available. Fleury is a proven commodity. Is he as good as he was 2 years ago, 3 years ago? Who knows the answer?
He's been pretty good this year.
He's been pretty good for a generally crummy team.
Bob, but here's an example, okay? 3 years ago, we saw Jordan Binnington come from winning in 4 or 5 months, winning his first NHL game, making his first NHL start, to winning a Stanley Cup. He gets the big bonus. And as of today, big contract. And as of today, Ville Husso, and I hope I pronounced that right, has started 8 consecutive games for the St. Louis Blues while Jordan Binnington is on the bench.
The guy gets hot.
Before we go to break, just to clarify, you guys are arguing two different things. The question of whether a star player makes an impact down the stretch is, I think Bob's correct. But I also think Scotty's correct, saying when you get a middle of the line guy like a Coleman, like a Goudreau, to build your depth for that marathon of the playoffs, it does work. So it's the little trades, the smaller trades that you can build your depth and get quality people. Those ones make a difference. Trading stars at this time of year it could be potentially career suicide.
I gotta say, John, for somebody that's sitting on the fence, that's a really logical argument.
Well, it's half of it's logical. We got to take the break. We're a little behind time here. We'll come back with more. Zeisberger and Burnside are with us. Back after this. Bob McCown, John Shannon, Mike Zeisberger, Scott Burnside, all here as we debate the relative merits of moves that might be made between now and the trade deadline, which is what, John, March 31st?
21st. Sorry. Yeah.
21st.
So the other thing is we've talked about who are the buyers. Who the heck are the sellers now? Isn't that a bigger question? I mean, isn't that?
Does Arizona have any players left, John?
Well, they do in Tucson, but I'm not sure I want an American League guy from Tucson. But where do the Vancouver Canucks fit into this? Where do teams in that? The Red Wings? Where do the Red Wings fit in this? I mean, is Steve Yzerman just going to sit back and say we're good for next year, or we're going to buy in next year? Those teams. Where does Dallas fit in? Those are teams that they're not going to make it. Well, but they think they might.
Well, I mean, Dallas. I mean, to me, Vancouver's a little bit simpler because they basically have no UFAs of import, and the only question is whether Jim Rutherford and Patrick Alvin and Emily Castonguay and Cammy Granato and that new hockey ops department, do they believe JT Miller is part of their future, moving forward? He's got another year in his
Brock
deal.
Besser.
To me, he's interesting because, it goes back to what we're talking about when you're acquiring players. It's why Tyler Toffoli makes so much sense in Calgary. He's got term left. So JT Miller's got 2 more. If you trade him now, he's got 2 playoff runs. So you can ask for the moon. And I'm sure that's what Vancouver's going to do. I say it's no better than 50-50 that you trade him. But to me, the teams that are, Pat Verbeek, he's 2 weeks on the job or whatever. His team's not very good now. And I love the Ducks. I just love what they're doing there. Man, they just look like they run out of gas. You got 2 top 4 defensemen who are going to be UFAs in Hampus Lindholm and Josh Manson. So what do you do? And you mentioned Dallas. You've got John Klingberg, who I cannot see how you can fit him. You've already pissed him off. Okay. What about Joe Pavelski? Again, we talk about elite players. Listen, to me, Joe Pavelski can go to any team that acquires him and do exactly what you want him to do. Play center, play wing, play down the lineup. He can do it all. And he is class. You would want him in your lineup to make a run at a cup if you're any of the 16 teams that we can name that feel they have a legitimate shot. But if you're Jim Nill, you have to decide what's your team, because you're coming off a loss against Arizona. Well, are you any good or not? I don't know the answer to that.
But here's the trouble, Scotty, and you were close to and traveled with the Dallas Stars for a couple of years ago. You know the pressure that Jim Nill is under from the owner, who wants to win.
Sure.
And that's been, people look at some of the, did the Stars really do that the last couple of years? It's been because Jim Nill has felt the heat from ownership. So does he pull the plug? And what does that mean for his future in Dallas? And I think that's what, when you're examining which teams are going to be buyers or sellers, that's what you have to look at too. I mean, sometimes it's the guy over your shoulder that is making more of the decisions than you are.
Yeah. But Dallas is, to me, I would just say one thing on Dallas. They're a team that if right now it's the way it's set, it's likely going to be one wild card spot, right? I mean, there's one spot realistically open. If they're that team, there are nights when I'm like, well, yeah, they will give Colorado all they can handle. Jake Otter's the real deal. They're, so I don't know. To me, this is the great fascinating part. You raise it, John, but man, you got to, if you're the GM, your hockey ops department, your ownership, you better be having some real honest discussions about what you want to accomplish, what you feel is legitimately realistic to accomplish, because the teams, to me, with those assets who are about to walk out the door, and if you're a team like Dallas and if you're a team like Anaheim, that's a tough pill to swallow. If you're watching John Klingberg, Joe Pavelski, Josh Manson, Hampus Lindholm, they walk out the door and you've got nothing to show for it.
Yep.
That's a problem.
Well, then the other side of the equation is, of the teams that are in contention, how many of them have significant enough cap space in order to be able to execute deals with players who have big tickets? And we understand that there are certain scenarios where there are players who are about to become free agents or whatever, and you take all that into consideration. But of the big four, let's say, who's got cap space? Who's got the cap space to go out and do something significant, like a Giroux, for example? Anybody know? Do any of them have cap space?
Not much.
None of the big.
Not much.
Like for most of those teams, it's dollar in, dollar out, and that's where teams like Arizona and Detroit and teams that do have some cap space, they're going to continue to be players where they're going to be able to draw in assets because they'll be able to take on some salary. But Bob, you're absolutely right. I mean, like let's say Carolina, I'd provide some content for them, and would they like to add on the blue line? My sense is probably yes. But they're in a dollar in, dollar out situation.
Exactly.
But you got to get creative. I mean, that's,
I understand that.
Happen.
Yeah, we might see more 3-team deals this year. This year where an Arizona or a Detroit says, which is what, let's face it, that's how David Savard got to Tampa last year. Is Steve Yzerman stuck his nose in and said, I can make that work. Yep. And those kind of trades take a little bit longer, but they seem to be able to happen before the 21st of March. I bet that's going to be the key. Is it the complexity of the cap, and next year, it's going to be fascinating to see how all of that can play out. I am one of those guys, though. If I'm a manager, and I like where my team is, I'm more reluctant to make a trade. I'm standing pat. I believe in my guys. I'm not sure that's the right message for the team at times, but I'm more willing to say these guys that got us here, and I'm going to stick with them. I just need to find a way to get, two more defensemen, two more forwards that can sit in the press box.
Well, you brought up an interesting team in the Detroit Red Wings, and I'm fascinated to see what happens with them because, it seems like they've been in a rebuild for so long. We talk about those consecutive 20 plus years that they made the playoffs. And now all of a sudden, they just seem to have flatlined, at least in the standings. But I love what's going on in Detroit, some of the young players that they have there. So it's going to be fascinating to me to see what Steve Yzerman does, because he could look and say, you know what, I think right now or by next year, we're already better than Montreal. We're already better than Buffalo. We're catching up to the Boston Bruins.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you do? Do you do one of those sell off and take assets in, or do you just sit and say, you know what, we're just going to keep this momentum going into next year? So, you know, he's given what he did in Tampa. You know, he seems to know what he's doing. So, but I'm fascinated to see what kind of angle he's going to take going into the trade deadline.
Well, and in the midst of all this, the team we haven't even mentioned, and probably with full justification, is the Toronto Maple Leafs, who are right there with Tampa and Florida in terms of the standings, and yet don't get and shouldn't get the kind of respect that those two teams get.
Well, hold on, Bob. Let me ask you. Right now, they're set to play the Tampa Bay Lightning in the first round.
Yep.
They're going to play the Tampa Bay Lightning. Who are you picking?
I'm anybody but the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Okay, there you go.
Well, guys, I actually had on a radio show recently, was asked by a former NHL player if the Maple Leafs were to take Tampa Bay to 7 games and it was like exciting and they had a chance to win.
Would Leaf fans be satisfied?
Yes, that's what I was asked. And I said a resounding no. And they also asked, would the season be considered a failure? Yes. Why? Because you can't look at who you're going to play, whether they just got nudged out by Tampa or the way that they were with the Boston Bruins, because this is a franchise. Forget about this core of Marner, Matthews, Riley. I mean, uber talented and you know, good people. But this is a franchise that has not won a playoff series, Bob, since the NHL did not have a salary cap. And since they used the center ice red line for 2-line passes for offside. That's how long it's been. So, you know, there's no moral victories anymore with this team.
You make it sound.
They're going to have to get through Tampa or Florida. It looks like case closed.
That last line, you made it sound like they haven't won since they was a Rover. I mean, come on now.
John,
it's almost true.
The Battle of Ontario, John.
Yeah, it's almost true.
Actually,
I had hair and yours was a different color. Okay.
The last time the Toronto Maple Leafs won a playoff series, one of us worked for the Toronto Maple Leafs.
What are you going to take?
Well, maybe
credit
they
for
should
that?
hire you at the trade deadline.
Oh God.
Well, I mean, it raises a couple of other points. I don't think we have enough time to really debate it. I hate the playoff format, and the Toronto Maple Leafs, let's be honest, have been punished by being in the division that they're in, and by the format that means you have to stay within that division, at least in the first round.
They weren't punished last year, Bob.
Yeah, I don't even know how they've been.
I'll give you
they've
that.
been punished because they can't win when it counts. That's
I'll give
even
you
with
last
home ice,
year.
even with home ice advantage.
Oh my gosh!
I'll give you last year.
They need to play a team like Buffalo. That's
Yeah.
the structural problem.
Well,
Buffalo, not the structure.
That's all very well and good, but the truth of the matter is that there should be a seeding of the playoff teams based on your performance during the regular season, and it should be based on wins and losses, total points. It shouldn't be based on
conference or the whole league.
The whole league.
Oh, Bob, it's pshaw.
Well, you want to stay in conference at the beginning?
Yeah,
Sure, go ahead.
yeah, I do actually. I would like to see 1 to 8.
I'm fine with that. I mean, I understand that there are limitations. In an ideal world, conference wouldn't matter. I get the travel stuff. I get the cost stuff, blah, 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 blah. But this playing within the division is, well, we know what it is. It's Gary's idea of creating rivalries where rivalries either will never exist or exist already. So it doesn't really have any purpose. Maybe geographical to some extent.
So Bob, if you say that, okay, under that format, if we put Florida, Tampa, Carolina as the top 3, even if the Maple Leafs were to finish 4th from 1 to 8, they're going to play Pittsburgh, they're going to play Washington,
they're going to play a 5
team, which they still haven't proven that they can beat.
I don't argue that. And I'm not trying to defend the Toronto Maple Leafs incompetence.
You're a homer.
Quite the opposite. But you're going to play a 5th seed rather than a 1 or a 2.
No, well, you're going to play right now based on points, and I get the games played and points percentage. But if just right now by the standings, they're in 6th, they play Tampa. So there you go.
Yeah.
You're still going to have to play. You still got to pay the piper. And like who knows? Maybe this is a year. I don't know. I honestly, Florida, to me, I watch them a lot, and they're really, really good. And Bobrovsky,
Okay, so is it fair to say Tampa and Florida might be the 2 best teams right now in the NHL?
Yeah, Carolina's.
Is that possible?
Carolina's pretty good.
All right, there's another one. So
I'm
3
gonna put
Eastern
Colorado
teams.
in there.
How many of those teams is going to get to the Stanley Cup final?
Only one, of course.
Yeah.
Of those 3. Yeah, but that's life, and that's life in an imperfect system.
It's life the way we know it because of the rules and regulations that are in place. And I will stand here as long as I'm standing, excuse me, and tell you that's not fair. That somehow, if you're going to have a regular season, then success during that regular season should be reflected in who you play in the playoffs. And that's not the case right now. Now it's a geography battle.
Mm-hmm.
And, they do it in the National Football League. They do it in Major League Baseball. They do it everywhere else. They do it in the NBA. They seed in the NBA.
I just want to say as a quick aside, Bob, that John's comment of you being a homer may be the most classic line in the history of this world famous podcast.
Well, not classic. Classic is an interesting term. Stupid is probably more apt.
Okay, Homer.
We have to go. We got things to do and people to see. We thank you very much for your sometimes insightful, sometimes ridiculous comments. And in spite of all that, we'll invite you back shortly. Thank you, boys.
Thanks for having us, guys.
We'll talk to you. Mike Zeisberger, Scott Burnside. We'll come back after these messages. And we're back. Thanks to Zeisberger and Burnside for being with us. I mean, one issue we didn't get to that I wanted to discuss a little bit, and I suppose we have dabbled in this a bit, the March 21st trade deadline.
Yeah.
Inevitably, invariably, there are going to be comparisons between the NBA and the NHL because their seasons basically parallel each other. They play the same number of games.
Mm-hmm.
The same number of teams make the playoffs. There are a lot of similarities between the 2 leagues. And the NBA has chosen to have a much earlier trade deadline than the National Hockey League. Which one do you prefer?
That's interesting. I would say that if you want to try to create news and activity and scrambling, then the later deadline is more effective. It's at a time because one of the things by that point is, and as we talked about, the East is set, really, right? The 8 teams are probably set for the East. Detroit is, I think, 6 or 7 points behind Boston. It'll be difficult for them to catch them. So it becomes one of those things where you say, okay, we're gonna try to ramp things up, create some energy, create some positive news for teams, involve the teams that aren't in the playoffs if they do try to create trades. So from that perspective, the later deadline is more effective that way. How it affects your team, if you're a manager, I'd rather have the trade deadline earlier in order to get a guy playing with his teammates, working things out, and improving down the stretch drive. Whether James Harden's ever healthy again to be able to play for the 76ers, to me, I'd rather have him in the lineup longer than a shorter period of time. So I don't know what disadvantage or advantage is for either side.
Well, as a fan, my preference, of course, is earlier. I think doing it in some years, 4 weeks, 3 weeks before the season ends,
mm-hmm.
really isn't a reflection. It doesn't give you an accurate reflection of what that team has accomplished over the course of the year. You kind of have to reset your sights.
Yeah.
On, okay, now, well, this all happened over 55, 60 games.
Mm-hmm.
Now what's going to happen in the next 20 games,
yeah,
and then into the playoffs. I think the reason it's done when it is because then it creates the ability for teams to make deals because the cash impact of salaries is lessened.
Correct.
So, instead of committing to $2 million of a player's salary, they're committing to $1 million of a player's salary, which makes it a little bit easier. And I understand that. I understand the reasons for it. I don't understand necessarily the logic of why the league would do that. I'd rather force teams to make decisions before the decisions are made for them by the standings, which means if the trade deadline was, say, now,
right,
teams that aren't 100% sure whether they're in or out are going to have to make that decision.
Yeah.
By March 21st, fewer teams will be in a quandary about it.
Yeah, no, you're right. And the reason the date is set, it's days before the end of the regular season, as dictated by the collective bargaining agreement. That's why the date is set. It's the amount of days before the end of the regular season with the CBA. So it's something that has to be, if you want to change it, it's going to be something that the league is going to have to negotiate with the Players Association. You know what that means, Bob? Well, if we give you that, what are you giving us in return?
No, and I mean, again, but if you're a player, wouldn't you rather know where you're going to be the rest of the year as quickly as possible?
I also might
rather than staying in a hotel
I'm
for a month, 2 months, 3 months.
Possibly either that, or I'm happy that I only have to stay in it for a month as opposed to 3 months because my wife and kids are in school, or my kids are in school and my wife's at home for 3 months while I'm traded. So
yeah, I get that too. I mean, it's an interesting situation, but I'm not sure necessarily that the Players Association would be against it. There might be a significant number of them that would be for moving the deadline up, but we're not going to solve that here. We generally don't solve very much of anything. But we have used up a considerable amount of your time on this holiday Monday. We hope you enjoyed the program, and we'll come back again. For John Shannon, Bob McCown, see you tomorrow.